My name is Myra Winters. I am 72 years old, and the day before we read my husband's will, the lawyer phoned me at 7 in the morning. His voice was low. "Careful, Mrs. Winters, there is a second document your stepson doesn't know about. Come to my office alone tomorrow and tell no one where you're going." I sat at the kitchen table, the oak table Douglas built me for our first anniversary, and I listened. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cry. I wrote down the address, hung up, and poured myself a second cup of coffee. What I found in that manila envelope the next morning rewrote 24 years of silence. But what happened at the will reading in a room of 12 people, including the woman who told Facebook I was just some woman who showed up 20 years late, that part I still cannot believe I lived through. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it began. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, the channel where mothers over 50 finally tell the stories the world tried to silence. If you're new here, every story on this channel is about a quiet woman who held every card. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated and subscribe so you don't miss the ending. I met Douglas Winters at the county clerk's office 24 years ago. He came in to file a building permit. Sawdust on his collar, black coffee on his breath. I stamped his paperwork and he looked at my hands and said, "You have the steadiest hands I've ever seen." I was 48. He was 50. Both of us had buried a spouse. Both of us had learned that loneliness has a sound. It's the click of a single deadbolt at night when no one else is coming home. We married at the courthouse 3 months later. No bridesmaids, no cake, just two people who had already lost once and weren't interested in wasting time. Douglas was a building contractor, built houses all his life, rebuilt barns, poured foundations for neighbors who couldn't afford professionals. When we moved to the farmhouse, 40 acres on County Road 7, an old dairy property he'd renovated by hand, he spent our first anniversary building me a table white oak felled in the storm of 2004. He sanded it for 3 weekends, carved our initials underneath where nobody could see. That table is where we ate every meal for 24 years, where he proposed with a ring he'd had resized from his mother's, where I signed the papers that saved us both. But that comes later. For now, what you need to know is this. Douglas and I built a life quietly without fireworks, without Instagram posts, just 24 years of coffee on the porch, arguments about the thermostat, and a love that didn't need an audience. There was one thing Douglas made me promise, one secret I carried for 19 years. Through every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every moment, his children looked past me like I was furniture. I kept that promise even when it cost me everything. Douglas had 2 children from his first marriage, Bryce 46, Nora 42. Bryce was a building contractor like his father, but without the discipline. He drove a $60,000 truck, lived in a house he couldn't quite afford, and every few months he'd sit at our kitchen table, Douglas's table, and say, "Dad, I just need the loan for 6 months. You know I'm good for it." He said this 11 times over the years. He was never good for it. The total came to $120,000, give or take. Douglas kept a quiet tally in his head. I knew because he told me once in the dark, staring at the ceiling. $120. He hasn't paid back $1. Bryce's mother, Lorraine, left Douglas when Bryce was 20, packed a suitcase, moved in with a coworker, and filed papers by the end of the month. But that isn't the story Bryce grew up with. Lorraine told him Douglas traded her in for someone younger. A lie. Douglas waited 2 full years after the divorce before he had coffee with another woman. I was that woman. Bryce believed his mother. 24 years of believing it. Then there was Nora, 42, an accountant. Polite in the way people are polite when they're keeping score, she called me Myra. Never anything warmer. Never anything colder. In 24 years, she never once called me Mom. I never asked her to. On the mantel above the fireplace, Douglas kept our wedding photo. Him in a blue tie. Me in the cream dress I'd bought at a department store. Every holiday, Bryce would look past it. Nora would look at it just long enough to look away. And then Douglas got sick and everything changed. Lung cancer. Stage 3 at diagnosis. The doctor gave him 18 months. He lasted 14. During those months, the house shifted. Bryce started showing up twice a week, not to visit his father, but to help with the finances. He sat at Douglas's desk, opened his mail, called the bank on Douglas's behalf. "Just making sure everything's organized, Dad." Douglas was too weak to argue. I wasn't too weak, but I was too tired. I was giving medications every 4 hours, changing bed sheets, driving 40 minutes each way to the oncologist. I didn't have the energy to fight my stepson for access to an envelope. Nora came every Sunday. She brought flowers. She held her father's hand. She also, on 3 separate occasions, walked into Douglas's study when she thought I wasn't watching and photocopied documents from his filing cabinet. I know because the copier counts pages. It went from 4,312 to 4,347 in one weekend. 35 pages. I never said a word. One night near the end, Douglas grabbed my wrist from the hospital bed. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Don't let them take the house, Myra. Promise me." I promised. I didn't understand why he was worried about the house specifically. We had a will. We had accounts. We had everything in order, or so I thought. Douglas passed on a Tuesday morning in May 6th, 14 a.m. I was holding his hand. The heart monitor went flat and the room was quiet, and I sat there for a very long time before I pressed the call button. Bryce arrived 2 hours later. He walked into the room, looked at his father's face, and then looked at me. "We need to talk about the arrangements," he said. Not "are you all right" arrangements. The funeral was at Grace Lutheran. 80 people came. Douglas had poured half the foundations in town, rebuilt the church steps himself in 2011. The pastor called him a man who built things that lasted. I stood beside the casket in a black dress I'd owned for 20 years. Douglas bought it for me when his best friend's wife passed. "Better to have it and not need it," he said. I never thought I'd wear it for him. Jolene arrived in a white blazer. That was the first thing I noticed about Bryce's wife. She wore white to a funeral. 43 years old, worked retail management at a department store, and carried herself like the store was hers. Jolene is the kind of woman who brings a measuring tape to a funeral. I mean that almost literally. At the reception held at the farmhouse because Douglas would have wanted it. Jolene cornered me in the kitchen. Everyone else was in the living room. She waited until we were alone. "Myra, we need to talk about the house situation." I held my coffee cup steady. "Bryce is the eldest son. It's only right that the house stays in the family. Douglas isn't even cold yet, Jolene. I'm just being practical." She smiled. "Someone has to be." I didn't answer. I took a sip. She waited. I took another sip. She left. When I washed the cups that night, I found Jolene's bag behind the coat rack. Inside was a manila folder, not the manila envelope that came later with printed real estate comparisons for the farmhouse. Estimated value, $1.6 million, 40 acres included. She had brought a property valuation to my husband's funeral. I closed the folder, put it back, didn't say a word. 3 days after the funeral, Jolene opened Facebook. She posted in the Winters family group 47 members, mostly cousins and extended relatives I'd met at holidays, and she wrote this. "Our father-in-law's legacy belongs to his children, not some woman who showed up 20 years late. Like and share if you agree." 47 likes, 12 shares, 8 comments, all supportive. Cousin Gerald wrote, "The house should stay Winters." Aunt Donna added a heart emoji. A woman I'd made casseroles for every Christmas for 2 decades clicked like and moved on with her mourning. My friend Betty called that afternoon. Betty Callahan, 68, retired librarian, my closest friend since I moved to this town. "Have you seen what that woman wrote?" "I've seen it." And I closed the app. "Myra, you can't just sit there." "Betty, I've been sitting here for 24 years. A few more weeks won't kill me." I hung up. Walked out to the porch, sat in the rocker Douglas built, the one with the uneven leg he always meant to fix and never did. 40 acres of silence stretched out in front of me. The hayfield, the tree-in, the barn where Douglas kept his workshop. 47 people agreed that I don't belong in my own home. My home. They just didn't know that yet. I want you to hold that sentence because right now you might be thinking what Jolene was thinking, that I was a second wife clinging to a dead man's property. That I showed up late and got lucky. you would be wrong. But not for the reasons you expect. The pressure came from 3 directions at once. First, Bryce sent a letter through his attorney typed on cream letterhead. Very official. It requested a voluntary transfer of the farmhouse into Douglas's estate for proper distribution among heirs. Deadline 30 days. The word voluntary appeared 4 times. The word litigation appeared twice. Second, Nora sent a text. No preamble, no greeting. Just, it would mean a lot to Dad's memory if the house stayed in the family. The real family. The real family. I read that 3 times. Then I set my phone down on the counter and made dinner for 1. Third, Jolene launched a petition, a physical one printed circulated at a family barbecue I wasn't invited to. We, the undersigned, support Bryce Winter's rightful claim to the Winter family home at 1140 County Road 7. 23 signatures in 1 week. She posted a photo of the signed pages on Facebook. Caption, "The family has spoken. A neighbor called that Wednesday. I heard you're being asked to leave, Myra." I'm so sorry. The whole town knew. Jolene had made sure of it. That night I sat at the oak table. I ran my fingers along the grain. Douglas made this table from a white oak that fell in the big storm, sanded it for 3 weekends until the surface was like river stone. Every nick and scratch was a year of our life together. The coffee ring where his mug always sat, the pencil mark where he sketched the barn renovation. 24 years of meals and arguments and tax returns and quiet mornings, they wanted to sell this table with the house. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang and everything I had been holding for 19 years started to crack open. "Mrs. Winters, my name is Raymond Sloan. I was your husband's private attorney." I sat up. Douglas's attorney was Paul Kessler, the man who'd drawn up our will 8 years ago. I had never heard of Raymond Sloan. "Private attorney. Your husband came to see me 8 months ago alone. He made 4 visits over the following weeks. What he prepared, Mrs. Winters, there's a second document your stepson doesn't know about." I held the phone against my ear. My hand was steady. 28 years of stamping deeds and filing property records. My hands don't shake. "Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, and Mrs. Winters. Tell no one where you're going." I wrote down the address. 3rd floor, 44 Main Street above the hardware store. I drove there the next morning before the sun cleared the tree line. The parking lot was empty. The stairs were steep. The office was small. 1 desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out over the feed store. Raymond Sloan was 61 graybeard, reading glasses on a chain. He stood when I entered and shook my hand. "Before I show you anything, I need you to understand something. Your husband spent 4 sessions with me. He planned this very carefully. He wanted you protected." He placed a manila envelope on the desk, thick, heavy, sealed with Douglas's initials in blue pen. "There are 3 items inside: a property deed, a cautel, an amendment to his will, and a sealed letter to be opened at the will reading in front of everyone." I stared at that envelope, yellow worn at the edges, Douglas's handwriting on the seal. "If you've ever been called an outsider in your own family, if someone posted about you online and 47 people agreed, you know what I was feeling in that chair? Stay with me. Because what was inside that envelope didn't just change my life. It rewrote everything my stepson thought he knew. Subscribe now. You don't want to miss this." Sloan opened the envelope carefully. He laid 3 items on his desk side by side: a folded document, a stapled packet, a sealed white envelope with Douglas's handwriting on the front. He picked up the folded document first. "Let's start with this." He unfolded it. A property deed, county seal, recording stamp, legal description. I'd filed 10,000 of these in my career. I could read one faster than most lawyers. My eyes went to the name Myra Campbell Winters. "Mrs. Winters," Sloan said. "The farmhouse and the 40 acres at 1140 County Road 7 are titled to you. You purchased this property 19 years ago at a county tax auction. This property was never part of your husband's estate." I looked at that deed for a long time. My maiden name, my married name, my signature from 19 years ago when my handwriting was steadier and my hair was still dark. "I know," I said. "I was the one who bought it." Sloan nodded. "Your husband brought me this deed 8 months ago. He wanted it presented at the will reading in front of everyone. He always did have a sense of timing. Sloan almost smiled. He also wanted you to know something. He said, and I'm quoting, "Myra probably thinks I forgot. I never forgot, not for one day. I spent 28 years filing deeds for other people, 10,000 transfers, 20,000 signatures. I could tell you the recording fee for a quitclaim in my sleep. And the most important deed I ever filed had my own name on it. And I never told a single soul until now." Let me take you back 19 years. Douglas was 55. I was 53. We'd been married 5 years. Still knew enough that I ironed his shirts without being asked. His business partner, a man named Dale Fenton, had been skimming invoices. Douglas found out too late. By the time the accountant untangled it, they were $300,000 in debt. The bank called the note on the farmhouse. Foreclosure auction 60 days. I remember Douglas sitting at the kitchen table, our table, with the notice in his hands. He didn't cry. He didn't hit anything. He just sat there like a man watching a house burn from the inside. I went to the bank the next day alone. I had $178,000, 28 years of county clerk salary saved steadily, a small life insurance payout from my first husband. No debts, no extravagances, just a woman who had always put 10% away before she paid anything else. The auction was on a Wednesday. 3 bidders. I won at $178. Every dollar I had below market value. Financial distress does that. I filed the deed myself. Myra Campbell Winters. I knew how to file it so it wouldn't show up in a casual title search. County clerk for 28 years. I knew every form, every index, every shortcut in the system, Douglas cried. The only time I ever saw it. Standing in the kitchen, hands on the counter, shoulders shaking. "Don't tell the kids," he said. "Please, if they know I lost everything, they'll never respect me again." So I didn't tell them. Not Bryce, not Nora, not anyone. I bought the house, filed the deed, and let Douglas keep being the man his children believed he was. That was the promise, and I kept it for 19 years. Back in Sloan's office, he picked up the stapled packet. "This is the codicil. A codicil is an amendment to a will legal binding. Douglas had signed it 8 months before he died, 4 months before the cancer made him bedridden. 2 witnesses, Sloan said, Dr. Martin Ames, your husband's personal physician, and Frank Bellini, his friend of 40 years, both independent, both willing to testify to his capacity." I nodded. Douglas had been sharp at that point, walking, driving, doing crosswords in pen. Sloan read the key clause. "Any beneficiary who within 6 months of my passing harasses, threatens, files suit against, or attempts to seize the property or assets of my wife, Myra Winters, shall forfeit their share of this estate. Said share shall be redirected to irrevocable education trusts for my grandchildren with Myra Winters as sole trustee." I sat with that for a moment. He wrote a morality clause? Yes. An interim provision perfectly legal in this state. And the grandchildren separate trusts, $50,000 each, already funded. Regardless of what happens with the rest, the grandchildren are protected. Douglas. Even from the grave, he was building something, not a house, this time a wall, between his children's greed and the woman he loved. He knew I said. He knew what they would do. Sloan took off his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. "Mrs. Winters, your husband told me something during our second meeting. He said, I hope I'm wrong about my kids, but I'm not wrong, and Myra deserves better than hope." I pressed my lips together, looked at the window. The feed store across the street was opening for the day. "What's in the letter?" I asked. "That opens at the will reading." His instructions were specific. I drove home with the manila envelope in my bag. The deed, the codicil, the sealed letter. All of it tucked beside my wallet and a pack of tissues I hadn't needed yet. I pulled into the driveway and saw Bryce's truck. Next to it, an unmarked white van. A man I didn't recognize was standing on my front porch with a tape measure. I parked, walked up the steps. "Can I help you?" Bryce came around the corner from the side yard contractor friend behind him. "Hey, Myra, we're just getting some measurements for planning purposes." Planning purposes? He was measuring my house, the house I owned. The house his name had never been on, not for a single day, planning for what I asked. Jolene appeared in the front doorway. She'd let herself in. She was holding a fabric swatch against my living room curtains. "Oh, Myra, we were just getting some ideas, for when we settle in." She was picking curtains for my house with my money standing in a doorway I had paid for with 28 years of my life. "The kettle will be ready in 4 minutes," I said. "Would you like tea?" Jolene blinked. No. "We're fine. Suit yourself." I walked past her, past Bryce, past the man with the tape measure. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, sat down at the oak table. The manila envelope was in my bag. The bag hung on the chair beside me, 12 inches from the table where Douglas carved our initials. Everything they wanted was right there, and they couldn't see it. I poured my tea, drank it slow. "Jolene has terrible taste in curtains, by the way. Mauve florals in a farmhouse. Douglas would have burned them." 4 days before the will reading, Bryce called a family meeting at my house without asking me. I came home from the grocery store to find 8 people in my kitchen. Bryce and Jolene, Nora, and her husband Raj, cousin Gerald, Aunt Donna, 2 more relatives I saw twice a year at most. Bryce stood at the head of the table, Douglas's table, like he was running a board meeting. I think we all agree that Dad would have wanted the house to stay in the family he began. Myra's been here a long time and we appreciate that, but she can find a nice condo in town, something manageable. Jolene jumped in. "You've had a good run here, Myra. 20 years of living on the family property. It's time to let the real family handle things." She looked around the room. Nods from Gerald, a murmur from Donna. Then Jolene said it. Standing in my kitchen in front of 8 people leaning against the counter, I scrubbed every morning. "Our father-in-law's legacy belongs to his children, not some woman who showed up 20 years late." I sipped my tea, looked at each face. Gerald, who I'd driven to the hospital when his wife had her hip replaced. Donna, who I'd made Thanksgiving dinner for 11 years running. The 2 cousins whose names I'd written on Christmas cards for 2 decades. 8 people sitting in my kitchen on chairs around a table my husband built with his hands telling me I don't belong here. I set down my cup. "The will reading is Thursday. I think we should wait for that." Bryce frowned. "There's nothing in the will that changes the situation, Myra." I stood up, carried my cup to the sink, rinsed it, dried my hands. "We'll see." After they left, all 8 of them filing out like they'd accomplished something, I stood in the kitchen alone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after people have said too much. I walked out the back door across the yard, past the garden Douglas planted every spring into the barn, Douglas's workshop. Sawdust still on the floor, his tools hanging on pegboard in the order he liked, wrenches by size, screwdrivers by head, the workbench he built from reclaimed railroad ties, solid enough to park a truck on. Sloan had told me, "Your husband said you'd find it in the 3rd drawer of the workbench behind the sandpaper." I pulled the drawer, moved the sandpaper aside, and there it was, a cedar box, small, maybe 6 inches by 4. The wood was polished smooth. Douglas had made it himself. I could tell by the dovetailed joints his signature technique. The smell hit me first, cedar sharp and clean like opening a window in winter. I lifted the lid. Inside 2 rings, our wedding bands, his and mine. I'd wondered where his had gone after the hospital. He must have given it to Sloan months before. A photograph. Douglas and me at the county clerk's office 19 years ago, the day I filed the deed. He'd brought a disposable camera. I didn't even know he'd taken the picture. I was bent over the filing counter signing my name. He was standing behind me smiling and a note handwritten blue ink. His handwriting blocky, uneven, a builder's script. "You saved this family once. Now I'm saving you. D." I sat on the workshop stool, held the box in my lap, read the note 3 more times. Then I closed the lid and I made a decision. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Wednesday afternoon, Nora came alone. No, Bryce, no Jolene. No lawyer, just Nora in a gray cardigan, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She wasn't drinking. "Myra, I don't want this to get ugly. Neither do I. But the house Dad built it with his own hands. It means something to us." I looked at her. Nora had Douglas's eyes, brown, steady, a little sad even when she was smiling. She had his hands too. Small for a man, large for a woman. Accountant's hands now, but built for tools. "It means something to me too, Nora." More than you know. She stirred her coffee. Bryce has already talked to a lawyer about contesting the will. The petition is just the beginning. He's filing for undue influence. I know. I'm trying to be fair here, Myra. I'm trying to find a middle ground. I almost told her right then. I almost said, Nora, I own this house. I have owned it for 19 years. Your father went bankrupt and I bought it at auction with every dollar I had. And I never told you because he asked me not to, because he was too proud to let his children see him fail. I didn't say it. Douglas asked me not to. Some promises you keep, even when keeping them costs you everything. The will reading is tomorrow, I said. Let's wait for that. Nora stood up, paused at the door. For what it's worth, I wish things were different. So do I, Nora. So do I. She left. Her coffee was full. I poured it out and washed the cup. Then I sat at the oak table and ran my thumb over the grain, and I counted the hours until morning. Tuesday evening, 2 days before the will reading. Jolene posted the petition on Facebook. Final count, 23 signatures. Caption, the family has spoken. Justice for the Winters children. Bryce's lawyer filed a formal letter with the county probate office intent to contest the will of Douglas Allen Winters on grounds of undue influence during terminal illness. The letter cited documented concerns from family members and financial irregularities, suggesting manipulation by the surviving spouse. Financial irregularities. That was me. The woman who bought their father's house and kept the secret for 2 decades. I was the irregularity. A neighbor I barely knew stopped me at the gas station. I heard you're being moved out, Myra. Such a shame. She patted my arm like I was already gone. Wednesday morning, I sat at the oak table with my coffee. The manila envelope sat on the table in front of me next to the salt shaker and a folded newspaper. It looked ordinary, brown paper blue initials. But inside that envelope was the deed to this house. A cottle that could reshape an inheritance, and a letter from a dead man who loved me enough to plan for the day his children would come for what was mine. 23 people signed a paper saying I should give up the house I bought, the house I paid for, the house I've lived in for 24 years. Not one of them, not a single one, ever asked whose name was on the deed. People assume. That's the thing. They assume the man's name is on the house. They assume the wife showed up and moved in. They assume the second marriage means second class. They were about to learn how assumptions work. The will reading was in 36 hours. Wednesday afternoon, Bryce brought his lawyer to my kitchen. Martin Gould, Esquire, 50 sharp-faced briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He spread papers across the oak table like he was laying claim to the wood itself. Mrs. Winters, my client intends to file a formal contest of Douglas Winters' will. Gould didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at his papers. We have documented evidence of financial irregularities, a signed petition from 23 family members, and a psychiatrist prepared to testify regarding Mr. Winters' cognitive state during his final year. Bryce sat across from me, arms crossed. You can make this easy, Myra. Sign the transfer. Take your share of the investment accounts. Walk away with something. I looked at Bryce, then at Gould, then back at Bryce. Your father's will reading is tomorrow. There's nothing in that will that changes anything. You'd be surprised what your father planned. Bryce's jaw tightened. Dad was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Your father was doing crossword puzzles in pen 3 weeks before he filed that codicil. Silence. Gould looked up from his papers for the first time. What? Codicil, Bryce asked. I stood up, walked to the door, opened it. I think you should wait for tomorrow. Bryce stared at me. Then at Gled. The lawyer gathered his papers slowly like a man recalculating. They walked out. Bryce paused on the porch, turned back. Whatever you think you have, it doesn't change who the real family is. I closed the door. Locked it, leaned my back against the wood, let out one long breath. One more day, Wednesday night, the last night before. Everything. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I sat at the oak table. Where else? with my coffee gone cold and the cedar box open in front of me. 2 rings, 1 photograph, 1 note in blue ink. I picked up Douglas's wedding band, held it between my thumb and finger, plain gold scuffed from 24 years of sawdust and concrete and building things that lasted. You saved this family once. Now I'm saving you. I put the ring back, closed the lid, set the box on top of the manila envelope. Then I called Betty. I need you tomorrow, 9 o'clock, Sloan's office on Main Street. Myra, what's happening? Douglas is about to speak one last time. Betty paused. I'll be there. Where's something comfortable? It might be a long morning. I hung up, packed everything into my bag. The envelope, the cedar box, a packet of tissues, my reading glasses. I set the bag on the chair next to the oak table where I could see it. Tomorrow, 12 people in one room. Bryce with his lawyer's confidence. Jolene with her petition. Nora with her careful distance. And me, the woman they'd already written off, carrying a deed, a codicil, and a letter from the man who built this table. I turned off the kitchen light, stood in the dark for a moment. The oak table was a shadow. The cedar box sat on top like a small monument. Good night, Douglas, I said. The house didn't answer. It never did. But I swear the floorboards settled the way they always did when Douglas walked to bed. What happens when the people who tried to take everything discover they never owned it in the first place? 12 people were about to sit in one room and only one of them knew the truth. If you've been waiting for the moment the quiet woman finally speaks, it's almost here. Subscribe and stay. This is the part you came for. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. I dressed carefully. Douglas's favorite blouse, the blue one with the pearl buttons he said made me look like a senator. Pearl earrings he gave me for our 20th anniversary. Black slacks, comfortable shoes. I wasn't dressing for a fight. I was dressing for the last thing my husband ever asked me to do. Sloan's office, 2nd floor. The conference room was small. 1 long table, 12 chairs, a water pitcher, and a window that didn't open. It smelled like old carpet and new coffee. They were already there when I arrived. Bryce in a navy suit, tie slightly loose. Jolene beside him in red fingernails tapping the table. Nora in gray hands, folded eyes down. Raj next to her, neutral, as always. Cousin Gerald, Aunt Donna, and 2 more relatives whose names I remembered only because I'd addressed their Christmas cards every year. Bryce had brought the extra people on purpose, witnesses, his audience. Betty was waiting in the hallway. She squeezed my arm. Ready. I've been ready for 19 years. We walked in. I sat at the far end of the table, Betty beside me, the manila envelope in my bag, the bag on my lap. 12 people in one room. The air was thick with cologne and anxiety. Jolene leaned over and whispered something to Gerald. I caught the word quick. Sloan entered. Last closed the door, set his briefcase on the table, took out a folder, put on his reading glasses. Thank you all for being here, he said. As some of you may know, Mr. Winters transferred executive duties to me 8 months before his passing. Mr. Kessler has been notified and has stepped aside. We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Douglas Allen Winters. He opened the folder. The room was quiet. I placed my hands flat on the table, steady the way they'd always been. Sloan read the original will, first the one Paul Kessler had drawn up 8 years ago. Standard language executive named debts and funeral expenses covered first, then the distribution. The real property at 1140 County Road 7 shall be sold with proceeds divided as follows. 50% to my wife, Myra Winters, 30% to my son, Bryce Winters, 20% to my daughter, Nora Kapoor. Bryce nodded. Jolene squeezed his hand under the table. I saw it. A small, satisfied squeeze. The house gets sold. They'd make an offer. Probably below market. Probably expect me to accept. Investment and retirement accounts shall be distributed in the same proportions. Nora let out a breath. Raj patted her knee. Gerald leaned back in his chair. Donna folded her hands on the table like a prayer had been answered. This was what they expected. This was the script they'd rehearsed. Bryce would contest if the split wasn't generous enough. Jolene would file papers. The house would be sold by September. Sloan finished reading. Set the page down. Paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, but I watched it move through the room like a draft from an open window. Gerald stopped, leaning back. Donna unfolded her hands. Jolene's fingers went still. Sloan looked up from his glasses. However, he said there is an addendum, a codicil filed separately, 8 months prior to Mr. Winters' passing, executed before a separate attorney, witnessed independently. Silence. Bryce leaned forward. An addendum. What addendum? Paul never mentioned. This was not prepared by Mr. Kessler, Sloan said. Your father retained me independently for this purpose. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a second document. Set it on the table. Shall I continue? Nobody said no. Sloan unfolded the codicil. 2 pages heavy paper, Douglas's signature at the bottom, the same blocky hand that wrote notes on lumber and signed birthday cards and carved our initials under the oak table. Codicil to the last will and testament of Douglas Allen Winters, dated January 14th, 8 months before he died, 4 months before the cancer put him in bed. Witnesses, Dr. Martin Ames' personal physician, Frank Bellini, lifelong friend. Both present at signing. A capacity assessment conducted by Dr. Ames on the same date is attached. Sloan read the clause slowly, every word deliberate. Any beneficiary who within 6 months of my passing harasses, threatens, files suit against, or attempts to seize the property or assets of my wife, Myra Winters, shall forfeit their share of this estate. Said share shall be redirected to a revocable education trust for my grandchildren, with Myra Winters as sole trustee. The room didn't move. Not a chair creak, not a breath. Bryce, what does that mean exactly? Sloan removed his glasses, set them on the table, looked at Bryce directly. It means that if any beneficiary has engaged in the behaviors described, harassment, threats, attempts to seize property, their portion of the estate is forfeited. The funds transferred to education trusts for your children, managed by Mrs. Winters. Jolene's voice cut across the room. That can't be legal. He was dying. He wasn't in his right mind. Sloan, same tone. The codicil includes a capacity assessment signed by Mr. Winters' physician on the date of execution. Mr. Winters was lucid ambulatory and completed the cognitive evaluation without assistance. Jolene opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. There's more, Sloan said. One more document. Jolene stood up. Her chair scraped the floor hard enough to make Donna flinch. This is insane. Her voice was high-tight. She manipulated him. This whole thing is a setup. She got to him when he was sick, and Jolene Brycelow. No, we have a petition. 23 signatures. We have a lawyer ready to file. This codicil is exactly the kind of thing a manipulative Mrs. Winters. Sloan had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. The petition, the formal contest, filing the letter from Mr. Gould demanding a voluntary transfer of property. These are precisely the behaviors the morality clause describes. The color drained from Jolene's face. I watched it happen like pulling a plug from a bathtub. Fast, visible total. She sat down. Every public statement, every signed document, every legal filing your family has made in the 3 weeks since Mr. Winters' passing falls squarely within the definition of harassment and attempted seizure outlined in this codicil. Gerald looked at the floor. Donna pulled her hands off the table. The 2 cousins at the end exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that says, we should not be here. Bryce was still arms folded, jaw locked, not looking at anyone. I sat in my chair, hands on my lap. I had not said a word since we sat down. I didn't need to. Douglas was speaking for me from 8 months ago from his desk at Sloan's office, from the clear-headed mind of a man who loved me enough to build a wall between his children's greed and my life. Jolene's mouth moved. No sound came out. I'd advise everyone to remain seated, Sloan said. There's one more document. Sloan reached into the manila envelope one final time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it flat on the conference table. The farmhouse and 40 acres at 114 O County Road 7 are titled to Myra Campbell Winters. He paused. Let the name sit. Filed 19 years ago at a county tax auction, recorded with the county clerk's office. This property was never part of Douglas Winters' estate. I have spent my life in quiet rooms, County offices, filing cabinets, paper and ink, and the soft thud of a stamp on a deed. I have never heard a room go as silent as that one. Not a breath, not a cough. 12 people turned to stone. Bryce spoke first, his voice cracked on the second word. That's not possible. Dad built that house. I looked at my stepson, 46 years old, his father's jaw, his mother's anger, sitting at a table in a lawyer's office, learning for the first time that the house he'd tried to take had never been his to claim. Your father built it, I said. My first words in 20 minutes. And I saved it. Jolene saved it from what I kept my eyes on Bryce. 19 years ago, your father's business failed. His partner stole from him. The bank foreclosed. We were going to lose everything. The house, the land, all of it, I let that settle. I used every dollar I had. 28 years of savings, $178,000. I bought this house at auction because I loved your father and I loved this home. My voice was steady. It never wavered. 28 years of stamping deeds. My hands don't shake. He asked me to keep it quiet. He was proud. He didn't want his children to know he'd failed. The room shifted. I could feel it like a tide changing direction. Bryce stared at the deed. His hands were on the table, palms down, and I could see them trembling. You paid all of it. $178,000. Every penny I had in this world. Nora's voice barely above a whisper. And you never said anything in 19 years. Your father asked me not to. I kept my promise. Gerald pushed back from the table. The man who had signed the petition, the man who had typed the house should stay winters on Facebook. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. We didn't know, he said. Myra, we didn't know. No, I said, you didn't. Donna was crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with the tissue from her purse. The two cousins at the end of the table stared at the wall. Jolene made one more attempt. That doesn't change the will, the investment accounts. Sloan cut her off. The morality clause applies to the entire estate, Mrs. Winters, not just the property. The house was never in play, but the investment accounts those were, and the clause has been triggered. Jolene's mouth opened closed. I watched the room rearrange itself, bodies shifting, chairs turning. Gerald angled toward me. Donna faced me for the first time all morning. The two cousins looked at Bryce and Jolene the way you look at strangers on a bus who are arguing too loudly. 8 people had walked into this room ready to take my home. Now they couldn't look at each other. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I sat in my chair and let the truth do what truth does when you give it enough time. Sloan reached for the final item, the sealed white envelope. Douglas's handwriting on the front. To be read at the table, D.W. There is one last item, Sloan said. A letter from Douglas to be read here. Per his instructions. He broke the seal, unfolded the page, single sheet. Blue ink. The same blocky handwriting I'd read on grocery lists and love notes and the cedar box in the workshop. Sloan read it aloud. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and my children have shown you who they are. Bryce flinched. Myra saved this family once 19 years ago. She used every cent she had to buy the house I lost. She kept my secret because I asked her to. She stayed quiet while you questioned whether she belonged. Nora covered her mouth with her hand. I wanted to see if you'd treat the woman I love the way I asked you to. I told you both more than once. Take care of Myra. She's earned it. I wanted to believe you'd listen. Sloan paused, adjusted his glasses, continued. The house was never mine to give. It's always been hers. That sentence landed like a stone in still water. Every ripple hit someone different. I'm sorry, Myra. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to say this out loud. I'm sorry I made you carry this alone for so long. You deserved better than silence. You always did. Sloan folded the letter, set it on the table. I closed my eyes. One tear rolled down my left cheek. That's all. One tear. 24 years of love and 19 years of silence and one tear. The room was absolutely still. 12 people. Not one of them moved. Douglas had spoken one last time and he'd said everything. Jolene broke first. This is a setup. She was standing again, hands flat on the table, voice high and cracking at the edges. She planned this. She got to the lawyer. She got to the doctor. This whole thing is Mrs. Winters. Sloane's voice was the same temperature it had been all morning. Room temperature. Unbothered. The codicil was prepared by Mr. Douglas Winters of his own volition. The witnesses are independent. The capacity assessment is attached. You are welcome to retain counsel and review the documents. Gerald stood up slowly like a man who just realized he was standing on someone else's land. I signed that petition. He looked at me. Myra, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Donna's still crying. Douglas never told us. We had no idea. The two cousins at the end of the table got up without a word and left the room. The door clicked behind them. Nobody called them back. Bryce hadn't spoken since the letter. He sat with his hands on the table staring at the deed, at my name on the deed, like he was reading it in a language he didn't know. Jolene turned to him. Say something. You're just going to sit there, Bryce? Quiet. Flat like a man who's been emptied out. What do you want me to say, Jolene? Fight this. Contest it. Do something. Bryce looked at the deed, looked at his hands, looked at nothing. She owns the house. She's always owned it. He said it like he was repeating something he'd just learned about gravity. A fact inarguable, as old as the dirt under the foundation. Jolene sat down. Her red blazer looked wrong now. Too bright, too loud, like a fire alarm in an empty building. Bryce turned to me. His eyes were red. Not from crying, from the effort of not crying. Why didn't you just tell us? I met his gaze because your father asked me not to. 20 years, Myra. 20 years, and you never once. 24, I corrected him gently, not to be cruel, to be precise. 24 years, and no, I never once. He shook his head. But all this time you thought I showed up and moved in, that I married your father and lived in his house and spent his money and contributed nothing. My mom said, your mother left Bryce. The room stopped again. I hadn't planned to say it, but it was true. And this room needed truth more than it needed kindness. Your mother left when you were 20, Bryce. She moved in with a coworker named Dale and filed papers by the end of the month. Your father waited 2 years before he so much as had coffee with another woman. I was that woman. Bryce's jaw worked. He looked at the table at his hands at the deed between us. I didn't steal anything, I said. Not your father, not this house. I earned both. He flinched, but he didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue. And Bryce, I waited until he looked at me. I was hoping you'd treat me like family without needing a reason. That was the line, the one that landed harder than any deed, harder than any codicil, harder than a dead man's letter, because it was the simplest truth in the room. I just wanted to belong, and they never let me. Bryce pressed his lips together, looked away. His shoulders dropped. Not in anger and something heavier. Jolene grabbed Bryce's arm. Don't listen to her. We can still fight this. The codicil. Martin can challenge it. We'll take it to court. We'll get a second psychiatrist. Will Bryce pulled his arm free. Not fast, not angry. Tired. Fight what Jolene. She owns the house. She always has. The will. The investment accounts. Sloane cleared his throat. For the record, the morality clause has been triggered by multiple documented violations. Mrs. Winters has preserved evidence of the Facebook posts, including the original post with 47 engagements and the petition photo with 23 visible signatures. She has the formal letter from Mr. Gould demanding a voluntary property transfer. She has records of verbal statements made in her home, corroborated by dates and witnesses. Jolene's head snapped toward me. You recorded us? I didn't need to. I folded my hands. You put it all on Facebook. Jolene stared at me, then at Sloane, then at the petition. Her petition, which was now Exhibit A in the triggering of her own husband's disinheritance. 47 likes 23 signatures. One Facebook post that said, our father-in-law's legacy belongs to his children, not some woman who showed up 20 years late. Those words belonged to Jolene. She typed them, she posted them. And now they were the reason the morality clause applied. I didn't write the clause. Douglas did. I didn't trigger it. Jolene did. All I did was sit in my kitchen, drink my tea, and wait for Thursday. Gerald looked at Jolene, then at Bryce. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, put it on, and walked out of the room without a word. Donna followed. The room was shrinking. Sloane continued, professional, thorough, and moved. Per the Cottesville's morality clause, the shares allocated to Bryce Winters and Nora Kapor from the investment and retirement accounts totaling approximately $420,000 are hereby redirected to irrevocable education trusts for their minor and adult children. Mrs. Winter serves as sole trustee until each beneficiary reaches the age of 25. Bryce stared at the table. So we get nothing. Your children get everything. Sloane said. Mrs. Winters manages it. And the house. The house was never part of this estate, Mr. Winters. It belongs to your stepmother. It has belonged to her for 19 years. Nora's voice quiet, steady. The voice of a woman doing math she didn't want to finish. That's what Dad would have wanted, isn't it? The grandchildren, the trusts. He didn't want to cut us out. He wanted to go around us. I looked at Nora. First real eye contact since the reading started. She wasn't angry. She was sad. The kind of sad that comes from recognizing a pattern. From seeing your father's logic clearly for the first time and knowing he was right to doubt you. He wanted your children to have a chance. I said, even if their parents didn't earn it, Jolene from the back of her throat. This isn't over. Bryce stood up, pushed his chair in, straightened his tie, the one that had been loose since he sat down. Yes, it is, Jolene. It's over. He walked out, didn't look back, didn't look at me. Didn't look at the deed or the letter or the manila envelope that had held all of it. Just walked through the door and down the stairs, and I heard his truck start in the parking lot below. The room emptied slowly. Jolene left last among the relatives, coat under her arm heels clicking fast down the hallway, the sound of a woman leaving a building she never should have entered with such confidence. Raj touched Nora's shoulder. I'll be in the car. Nora nodded. Raj left. Sloane gathered his papers, gave me a small nod and stepped into his private office. The door closed with a soft click. Nora and I alone. She didn't speak right away. She was looking at the table at the deed still lying there and Douglas's letter beside it. Myra. Her voice was raw. I photocopied those documents, Dad's financial papers, while he was in the hospital. I was going to use them to contest the will. I know. He knew, didn't he? Dad knew what we were planning. He hoped you wouldn't. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. Not loud, not dramatic. The quiet crying of a woman who has just been shown in front of a room full of people exactly who she chose to be and can't unknow it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached into my bag, took out the cedar box, set it on the table between us, opened the lid, the rings, the photograph, the note. You saved this family once, now I'm saving you. D. Nora read it. Read it again. Pressed her fingers against her mouth. He didn't write this to punish you, I said. He wrote it because he loved me enough to protect me, and he loved you enough to leave you a test he hoped you'd pass, and we failed. The trust is still there, Nora. Growing for your children, that's not failure. That's his love redirected. She reached across the table. Her hand found mine. She held on. 1 month later, Jolene's Facebook post was gone, deleted or maybe reported enough times that the platform removed it. The petition vanished. 23 people suddenly didn't remember signing it. Gerald sent me a card. Donna brought a pie. The 2 cousins who walked out of the reading sent flowers with a note that said, "We should have asked." Bryce hadn't called. Not once. Betty told me she'd heard from someone at the hardware store that Jolene was furious and Bryce was not talking to anyone. I didn't chase that thread. If Bryce wants to call, he knows the number. If he doesn't, that's a choice I can live with. But Nora called every Sunday. Sometimes she talked about her father, memories I hadn't heard from before I knew Douglas. Sometimes she asked about the house, about the garden, about the oak table, and whether the wobbly leg on the porch rocker ever got fixed. One Sunday, the 4th one, she called me something she hadn't called me in 24 years. She called me Mom. I didn't cry. I thanked her. and I set the phone down on the counter and stood very still for a long time. The education trusts were growing. $210,000 on each side. Bryce's 2 children, Nora's daughter college tuition, or a first home, or whatever they'd need at 25 when the world asks you to be an adult and you realize how much that costs. I rehung our wedding photo on the mantle. Jolene had turned it face down during one of her decorating visits. Douglas in his blue tie, me in my cream dress. 24 years ago, the county courthouse. No cake, no bridesmaids, just us. It's still there. Face up where it belongs. I sit at the oak table most mornings. Coffee sunlight through the kitchen window. 40 acres of silence and 1 cedar box on the shelf above the stove. Douglas knew his children better than they knew themselves. He didn't punish them. He gave them a test. They failed it. But the trusts are growing. And Nora calls every Sunday. Sometimes the quietest person at the table is the one who built it. That's my story. 24 years of silence, 1 manila envelope, and a deed nobody knew about. If this reminded you to check whose name is on the paperwork, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.